Hello, good morning. We're broadcasting live from Boston on day 2 of the Red Hat Summit. Regardless of how you participated yesterday, whether here in person or virtually online, I hope you had a great day 1, and I know you're going to have a great day 2. We're kicking off the first of a series of Ask the Expert sessions here this morning, and there's a lot of great Ask the Expert sessions, a lot of which are on technology. And one of the things that we know is that technology is important, but just as important, if not arguably more important, are things like people and process and culture. And so we're going to spend some time today in this session on open leadership in an open organization, really talking about the people. And so my name is Chris Runge. I'm pleased to be with you here today. I lead the solution architecture team for Red Hat. And I've got 2 great guests with me today here for our Ask the Expert sessions who have a wealth of experience and knowledge in this area of open leadership and open organization. And so, Jen, thanks for joining us, and Shabnoor, thanks for joining us as well. Well, let's do a quick round of introductions, give people a little bit of background on who you are and how you've been involved in this. So, Jen, maybe let's start with you.
Hi, my name is Jen Kelchner. I'm co-founder of a company called Interchange, where we focus on helping do concept and collaboration and change with our partners. I'm a pioneer in the field of open. I've been working in open organization to help articulate the characteristics that we use around open, not just in open source, but how we do behaviors as people, and also the processes to operationalize openness.
Fantastic. Thank you. Shabnoor?
Hi, I'm Shabnoor Shah. I am the Open Leadership Global Lead and Executive Coach at Red Hat Open Innovation Labs. And my work entails actually bringing the open culture, open leadership mindset, not only to our teams, but also to our customers through our engagements at Red Hat Open Innovation Labs, through residencies, and through our transformation engagements. I'm really pleased to be here today to talk a little bit more about open leadership.
Fantastic. Thank you, Shabnoor. Well, hey, we've got an opportunity here for everybody to ask questions. And so if you're tuning in from home, please submit your questions through the Q&A on your live stream. You have an opportunity to upvote those questions. And for those of you who are here joining us live in Boston, there's some tablets behind you where you also have an opportunity to do that. And please use the tablets if you can, because that gives other people an opportunity to upvote those questions online too. But before we jump into maybe some of the questions, I know that we should probably define a few things. We're eager to talk about the benefits of open leadership and open organization and how that can help people and organizations meet their goals. But what does that even mean? What is open leadership? What is open organization? So, hey, Jen, maybe just share with us a little bit of background in terms of defining those terms for us and why they're so important in this day and age.
So the term open organization, and what most of you would know about that in terms of the 5 characteristics that we have pulled from open source communities, comes from the Open Organization, which is an upstream community supported by Red Hat. That group of ambassadors has gone through the process with the community to define and articulate what that may look like, look at operational processes. But I think it's important to think about the word organization. Often we immediately want to jump to that word encompassing the whole of a company, the whole of an ecosystem, which it does. But an organization can also be your team. It can be a group of people that are collaborating. So we can then take these behaviors and mindsets that we'll talk about today and apply that in the context of any group of people coming together to collaborate to do work. Those characteristics then, look like things, how your team, for example, would have information flow. So, often we talk about the accessibility for information or to look at projects, to review them. But keep in mind that openness, in terms of, I like to use openness so we're a little bit more broad in our context today. It exists on a continuum. These principles, these characteristics can be dialed up and dialed down. So they have the ability to be used in a traditional hybrid or a decentralized organization. So often there's a lot of misunderstanding around how we talk about these things today, but that's just because we need to set context. So we can do that today as we go along with your questions.
Fantastic, thank you. And Shabnoor, what's your observations in this area in terms of working with open leadership, and how would you see that contrasting with maybe more traditional approaches that,
yeah.
that people are more used to?
Well, that's a great question, actually. So you will also, what you'll find with open leadership is that it has quite an overlap with some existing leadership models, things like authentic leadership or servant leadership, even to some extent transformation leadership. But what makes open leadership unique in itself is, first of all, it's based on the open source development model. And what that is underpinned by is the 5 characteristics that just Jen just talked about, and that's the defining thing. To practice openness requires tremendous amount of courage and ownership, because it is a shift from conventional style of leadership, is because you are actually decentering yourself from many aspects, and you're trusting your teams and your organization to collaborate with you on taking decisions with you, right? So you're actually being inclusive, making sure that the stakeholders, people who are impacted by the decisions, people who do the work, are part of the decision-making process. And in conventional ways of leading, you would see that it's generally top-down, right? It's about being instructional. So it works in certain setups, but if you're really thinking of being in agile organizations, if you're looking at professional success, organizational success, and if you are opting in for open source technologies and open ways of working, you need to have an open mindset, and open leadership can pave the way for that.
Yeah, that's so interesting that, I think as an open leader, it's less about focusing on yourself and making space for others to really contribute and help move things forward. Well, let's make this a little bit more tangible here, if we could. So, in good terms, open leadership, open organization, making space for others. Maybe share with us an experience of where you've seen people actually adopt this and some of the benefits that they've had. So, Jen, maybe we'll start with you on that.
I think one that I like to share that's easy to kind of get our hands around is, my company did a case study on this. There's a company called Slalom Consulting, and they were at a point a number of years ago where they needed to scale and scale rapidly, because they were trying to look at, again, how do we work differently? How do we think about serving our clients differently? How can we move through the speed of innovation faster with our clients? And one of the approaches that they took from an open perspective was implementing more feedback channels to gather more information from how their people felt. How did they feel about the work they were doing? What could they do differently? And one of the things they found between the feedback loops with their internal stakeholders and externally with their clients is they wanted to implement more of a learning mindset. So I like to call this a regenerative learning mindset. That's really all change is just learning. So we can kind of bring that down so it's not as scary. But what they did is they then began to create, anytime they didn't have one of their consultants actively at an engagement, if they were considered on the bench, they had to go into training. So they learned cross-collaboratively. They worked on things that were outside of their normal sector to have better understanding, have more depth of skills. And so they developed that. And what happened is they were able to scale from building within versus having to go out to source and recruit to find different talent. So they were able to serve their clients faster, easier. It wasn't necessarily built on who had the most tenure in the company. So again, it was going back to who's got the best ideas, who can serve our client, how do we build solutions faster and more sustainably. And so I think it's an easy example to kind of understand how a couple of simple tweaks with feedback and openness, and then providing the right type of opportunities for training and learning, how quickly that impacted their success for their customers.
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. And, I'd like to give you an opportunity as well, Shabnoor, to share, a tangible, real-world example from your experience.
Yeah, no, I can share quite a few, but I'll be mindful of the time. I'll be very honest with you and our audience here, is that it sounds really nice to talk open and about open leadership, and it's like really nice to give instructions, but when you have to go down and really help people transform or adapt open ways of working, guess what? Leaders or organizations don't have a need to do that like right up front when they say like they have been successful doing what they've been doing. Why should they opt for becoming open, or why should they change their behaviors, right? So when we are interacting with our customers, through our engagements, the idea is not to force a philosophy or a methodology. The reason we want to bring openness to our customers is because they are aspiring for something, right? They have a purpose and an objective they want to achieve. The thing is that the previous conventional methods had not worked, right? And the way it shows is in your revenues, in your performance, in your CSAT, for example, in your employment engagement. And the leaders often asking, what is it not working, right? And say, we don't know, you have to reflect. But guess what? We can offer you something that's worked for us and some of our customers, and that's an open way of working. So when we start the journey in our engagements is we're not only focusing on technology, but helping understand what open ways of working is and what role of an open leader is. And that goes down to creating a support system for those leaders, for the teams to adapt open ways of working. The reason I say leaders and teams is because I want to demystify something about open leadership, that it's not vested in roles and titles particularly. Open leadership is open to all, and you can practice it at any level. It depends on the ecosystem organizations are creating. So if you truly want to be an open leader, right, the first thing that you start with is identifying your own relationship with your own leadership style and your willingness and intent to change. And that's why we work with our leaders, and that entails not only workshopping, not only talking about the concepts, but really hand-holding through executive coaching and support. And that's a bit of a long-term journey. We recognize that it requires time to change behaviors and mindsets. So that's what we do with our customers, right? A lot of intensive work through our engagements, with DevOps and culture engagement sessions, through residencies and open leadership engagement. I hope that sort of answers the question to some extent.
No, it does, and I think it reminds us of an important thing, that open leadership is not just for managers. Like, everybody has a great opportunity to be an open leader. So I know we've got some great questions coming in from the audience here. So let me pull up some of our most top voted questions here. All right, this is great. Ooh, this is a good one. How is open leadership dealing with failures? So we like to talk about all the good things about open leadership, but what about when things don't go so well? And how does open leadership handle that?
I'm going to start, if you don't mind. I don't like the word failure. It's my least favorite F word. I think that one of the things we have to do as leaders, because we always talk about that, right? Like, how do you embrace failure? What is failure actually? Failure is just a process of learning. So if you understand that change actually happens in 5 different phases. So we go through different phases of change, much like the Mobius loop, those of you that are familiar with that. But when we encounter things that aren't working, which we have previously deemed as failure, that's really just an opportunity for us to take the lessons that we've learned and course correct, make the adjustments and adapt, and then we loop back through that cycle of change again to begin the next process of iteration. So if we look at failures as a learning opportunity, it's far easier to embrace that as leaders and to talk about it. We've got to go back to being more human in all of our approaches that we have in how we work, how we collaborate, and how we learn. And failure is a part of that process. And people will follow you if a leader, doesn't matter if you're leading a team or just your peers, people will follow you if you're being open and vulnerable to share what hasn't been working, or if a genuine mistake was made, but to be able to own that with transparency. That inspires and creates trust, and trust is a critical component and tenet of success in our organizations with our clients, and also internally in leading teams through psychological safety.
Great, thank you. Shabnoor, anything you want to add?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I have a slightly contrary view here, not opposing, but we embrace failure, right? So when you talk about open and openness and open organization and open leadership, in open source we have a saying that it's all about failing fast. So we begin with the recognition that whatever we're going to be embarking on, especially if it's transformational, we are going to encounter challenge and we are going to encounter failure, and we love failures because it tells us that we are probably not on the right path. It means that we have to course correct. And once you go with that sort of preparation in your mind, then you can prep yourself to find out solutions, right? And that's where, for us, adaptability is so important. And adaptability happens when you have the right information coming into you, and that information comes from the field, that comes from the people who are working on things, right? So what are the kind of feedback loops you are creating in your organization to make sure you're able to course correct. And that's why we have another term called release early, release often, because you don't have to wait for a major failure to happen. If you are tuned in and you're willing to recognize that failure is happening at at some early stage, you can course correct it faster. So we believe that yes, failures are going to be there, but we don't have to suffer the failures, but we can prep up for them.
No, that's good. I mean, I think so conditioned to think of failure as a liability, but looking at it and seeing that it can also be an asset, I think is a great observation. All right, well we got some other good ones here too. So, what's the hardest part of open leadership?
Being vulnerable.
Being vulnerable. Can you mind expanding on that?
I think, again, I like to pull it back to this is about being human.
Yeah.
And the way that we've been working previously, it's hard to, if you're not in if you're not using open approaches in your environment already, it's very difficult to step in, because being open and using open approaches does require vulnerability, because you have to begin to trust the people that you're collaborating with, which could look simply like reliability and dependability, but it can also go much further than that. And then from a leadership behavior perspective, you have to put yourself out there and model open behaviors, which can be very uncomfortable. And that could come with things like conditioning and programming that we have as individuals, because of the fact that, 95% of our decision-making is done in our unconscious mind, which means that what's controlling that are your experiences, your conditioning, your values, your beliefs. So if you have some bias kind of tucked away in there that you're not really aware of, that could be preventing you, for example, of being inclusive or being collaborative. And so it's a tricky game at first to step into a group being an open leader, because you're like, ah. And I had my own experience with that when I first worked in an open community. Everybody's like, well, we share information and people can look at your projects and they can, tell you what they think about it. And I was like, well, I don't like that. That feels, but that for me was coming from a place of I didn't trust people I collaborated with because of prior experiences I had. So I had to learn to work through that to become a better leader, and ultimately, has led to expansion of my own mindsets of how to do that and help other people with it.
Yeah. No, I totally agree with that, of course, that and. So there are 5 characteristics of open organization and open leadership, right? It's transparency, inclusivity, collaboration, community, and adaptability. And I don't mean to scare you all, but like if you put yourself through each of those characteristics and have to practice them, all of them can be very scary, right? Like for example, around transparency. It's nice to lecture everyone on transparency, but like if I have worked on an amazing concept, right, which is really close to my heart, I want to protect it to the point that it shouldn't be taken away from me, right? But we also say defaulting to open means opening up and sharing, and that's where what Jen had mentioned about vulnerability is like trusting the process. That if you are going to share, it's going to transform. So one of the biggest fears of open leadership is that you might have an idea that you're attached to, but when you open it up, it blossoms, it changes form, it doesn't remain the way you want it to be like, but guess what? It becomes even better. And we have like a myriad of examples, to showcase that. So that's one, and I can give more examples maybe offline if anybody's interested.
No, that's fantastic. It's interesting because that mirrors my own experience, just candidly. And just starting as a leader, I felt like I was somehow required to have all the answers. And people look to leaders to have the answers. And realizing there's so many situations that we find ourselves in these days where we don't have the answers, right? And being that can lead to a moment of uncertainty and vulnerability. And just in my own personal experience, I found that just being upfront with people about that hey, in this particular circumstance, you're actually closer to this than I am, and you're going to have a lot better insight and perspective on that. And so together we can have, I think, a richer approach rather than me trying to, make it up as I go, right? Yeah. Or pretend like that's the case. So I thought that was a great question. All right, so we've got some other good ones here too. Okay, particularly apt in this day and age and in this in this environment that we find ourselves here, where we've got obviously a studio audience and people coming in online as well. How do you maintain and foster the open culture in a virtual setting or now a hybrid setting where some are in the office and some are online? How have you seen open leadership and open organizations work in this type of environment?
So this is a great question. And those of you that are in person can come to my session at 2 o'clock on what blocks open culture, because we're going to dig into culture more. The culture really is a combination of many things. It's not necessarily an environment or style that you find in your organization. It's ethos, it's frameworks, it's how you organize to actually work, it's your governance and policies. So it's a whole lot of things that go into culture. So with something like how do we deal with these hybrid environments as leaders, it is, I think, primarily one of the biggest things is information flow and finding ways to foster connection. And that can be done in a virtual environment the same as it can be done in person, and sometimes can even be done better. Some people are more comfortable than being in person. So you can find ways to foster connection and creating that space for information flow in all of your processes and how you're organizing to actually accomplish the projects. That's one thing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We've had a very close experience with transitioning, from in person to a virtual environment. I mean, we thought we were doing it well enough already, but the pandemic really showed us the mirror. So, if I can give you an example of all our Red Hat Labs residencies we're taking, one of the conditions was that it has to be co-located in person for 8 to 12 weeks, right? And then suddenly here we were faced with, well, nobody can go anywhere, right? It's all virtual. And then we had to really step up and find out ways on how could we do these intense residencies and engagements virtually, maintaining the same things. Now, when we started off, we made a lot of mistakes. We learned a lot of things, but a few things were like a core, like some things remain. People are people, right? You need to have empathy. And you need to understand that everybody is going through, a lot behind the scenes, right? Virtual environment requires acquiring special skill sets and competencies which we haven't been exposed to before. So you as an organization have to create a support system, a systemic environment that kind of takes into consideration the evidence-based learnings that we are getting from the market, from the field, from what we are experiencing, and then defining our policies. Not only that, but remain with the human touch, what Jen was talking about, is we're going through a lot, right? And this is the new normal. And highly likely it's not going to change us if you're in the knowledge economy. Maybe that's the way to go, and embracing change, identifying what's working and recognizing what's not working and looking at ways to be creative. I think people will, if you opt for open decision making and invite your people, your employees to come up with solutions to solve that problem, I think they will be able to provide immense mind share and insights. And we did that, and we're continuing to grow. We haven't mastered it yet, but my invitation would always be just recognize there's change happening, embrace it, work with your people to find solutions, and don't hesitate to fail.
Yeah, I was just thinking as both of you were speaking through this about the change that I'm sure a lot of us have gone through, where we're leveraging tools, online tools, to the Google Meets and the Zooms and the Microsoft Teams and the Blue Jeanses of the world, and how those have actually, in my experience, fostered greater inclusivity of voices. Because when you're all together in a room, it's often the case that the loudest voice wins or gets heard more often. And then we discovered the little raise the hand tool, right, in the online chat, where before it's like, what's that for? But now I find that a lot of leaders are using that tool as a way of respecting and again, making space for others to have their voices. And so it's been able to draw, more people into the conversations. So, one of those kind of unexpected or unintended consequences that's turned out, I think, really well as a part of this move to virtual and hybrid work.
Definitely.
Okay. Well, just a reminder, friendly reminder to keep the questions coming in. These have been some really good ones here. Okay. Wow. This another good question here for our panel of experts. Is transformation to open leadership a mindset change, a behavior change, or a combination of both?
Ooh, I think it's everything. So, and I know you're going to have a lot to say about this on behaviors, but it's mindsets, it's cognitive behaviors, and it also is a change in your processes, your approach to how you're organizing, how you're discussing things, how you're making decisions. It's a little bit of everything, but the biggest, I would say, wouldn't you say the mindsets and the behaviors go hand in hand? But it's crucial. We have so many limiting beliefs baked into us, especially our preconceived notions of how to operate as a leader within an organization. And you have to begin to deconstruct that with open, and then look at other behaviors that are more promoting of those characteristics, and then begin to relearn those and expand yourself. So it's a bit of work, would you say in the beginning?
Yeah.
But it's not scary. The word transformation is very scary to a lot of people. It comes with a lot of baggage, and it doesn't have to be. My favorite saying that people hate is change is only as hard as you choose to make it.
Yeah. I mean, you really captured it aptly. What I can say is transformation is when you approach it with an intent and a purpose, you will see that it becomes easier. And yes, it is about all of these things, about mindset and behavior. But what the intent does is, intent shapes and informs your thinking. And that thinking leads to the way you take decisions, right? And when you have that kind of a structure in place, you're then able to support yourself. Because it's sometimes like if you have a certain way of working, I mean, even if you have a habit, changing that can be so difficult, right? So if someone comes and tells you, hey, come on, you have to be an open leader, now start being that, till the time you are intrinsically invested and find that motivation and purpose to change, it will not happen. And I think it applies the same to organizations as well. Why should they change if they have been successful until now? And it goes back to that point. And when you recognize that you are willing to go with that transformation, the support that is required is about finding ways on how will you facilitate and make it easy for the organization to embrace that change, right? Be it mindset and behavior. Because if you have the mindset, the behaviors can follow through, right? But you shouldn't expect everyone to be able to do it at the same pace, at the same speed together. And that's why transformations take a lot of time, because it's all about change, and change is not easy. Like, there is a sort of a paradox that we want to do, like we want to go to the moon, but there are times we don't even want to change our homes or our rooms, right? So, and it could be in different things to different people. So the organizations that are learning organization, investing in helping, providing the right kind of support and mindset and trainings around behaviors and mindsets. I would even say deep focus on self-awareness can go a long way, so that people can be coached. You can as a leader can play a coaching and a mentoring role. That's why your vision is something that people will tap into. So if you are able to do it as a hierarchical leader, for the lack of a better word, I think it becomes easier for your organization to follow through, because they see hope in you. And they say, if you can do it and you're willing to invest and that time, effort, and energy, I think people want to follow their leaders.
Yeah, no, very apt. And as I'm sitting here thinking about open leadership, and we're talking a lot about the benefits of open leadership, but maybe if we challenge ourselves a little bit, are there potential drawbacks to open leadership, or could open leadership or some of its key behaviors sometimes be an overused strength? And if so, how might one kind of look out for that? Or are there times when open leadership may not be appropriate? So love the view on that, Jen.
Oh, I got lots to say. But listen, open is on a continuum, right? And it's just like everything. You have to have balance. So if you're sitting at the extreme on either end of that spectrum, you're too rigid or you're too flexible, then to your point of the question, that's when you start to have those pitfalls happen, because you're in extreme, you're out of balance. Each one of those characteristics that we talk about, or other conditions that support and aid openness, all can have a dial to them. You can think about, when is it appropriate? Open has to have context. It has to have context to your situation, to your sector, to the project you're working on, and then you know, do we dial this up, do we dial it down? So if you're, for example, have to be very considerate of regulations and the word transparency doesn't work for you, think about it. Well, externally, or looking at like data privacy, it may not be as transparent with certain things, but there are other ways that we're transparent, right? So it's, again, each of these things go up, they go down, they have a balance, and they exist based on your context. So if all of that is coming together the way it should, and we're making those decisions appropriately and being informed through those behaviors we've talked about, there isn't really a problem with open. And in fact, I would even point out the way that we're moving even faster into the emerging future. Openness, open leadership, open processes and approaches are very critical to how we succeed in the future and remain relevant in our industries and organizations.
Yeah, I concur with what Jen has said, and if I can just add my 2 cents to it is, so yes, so applying open leadership, right, requires an open culture and open environment. So if you are proceeding, with the open leadership flag alone, and you're not taking your organization along, it can be challenging. And that means that how are you enabling your people to come along on that journey, right? And because open leadership is not about one person or one leader. Open leadership is about how are you creating an ecosystem, a subculture or a culture which is positive, which is generative, and which facilitates space and opportunities for people to embrace elements of openness, right? If you as an open leader are able to and are facilitating space for your employees to become open leaders, that's when it will work. But if you're not taking them along, the chances are that you'll be struggling quite a lot, right? The other thing is that what I'll build on your point of view is about openness. It's not an either or, right? These are not 2 polarities that you have to choose between. And at Red Hat, we call it as the degrees of openness. And this is where you use your other skills and competencies and knowledge and expertise and experience to discerning and taking decisions which are relevant in accordance with your existing organizational culture, with your organizational purpose, the objectives that you're trying to achieve. And remember, it's a journey. If you're not on an open leadership journey yet, remember that it's going to be a path that you will have to set. It doesn't happen overnight.
Again, it's that concept of making space for others, right? Not just taking space, which I think is so important in this particular context. So another upvoted question here, which is maybe, kind of some curiosity that people have, not just about open leadership and open organizations in general or generically, but a real desire to peer behind the curtain, if you will, of Red Hat. And how does Red Hat empower their employees from an open leadership perspective? So maybe, Shabnoor, that'd be a good one for you to start.
Yeah, definitely. I can share so many examples of how we are practicing. First of all, our leaders. I want to give a call out to our leadership team, starting from Paul Colmier and down. They are so committed to maintaining an open culture at Red Hat, which means that if you sit through our quarterly meetings, our monthly meetings, or whatever meetings that are taking place, everybody has an opportunity to participate in all of those calls. Like the entire organization of 20,000 plus people is invited, and they can pose questions, and people pose difficult questions. Like, we don't have it easy. What I love is that our leaders have the ability to gracefully handle those questions, and not only handle those, but really take that feedback into consideration and do something about it. Does it always turn out to be like to everyone's expectation? The thing is, in an organization, you can't please everyone, but the fact that we have something known as the open decision making, open decision framework, which facilitates every voice is heard, and we try to include as much, but it's also about the best ideas winning and what's most relevant. We are in business enterprise as well, and keeping in mind what's relevant for us and for our communities. How do we remain true to our organization? So these are, it really starts with the leader. But even our own practices of keeping our calendars open, right? There's something known as a memo list at Red Hat, which is a fantastic place where flame wars take place, but where exchanges takes place. And guess what? Nobody gets fired because of that. But I mean, if an organization can create a safe space like that for its employees, I think, right? That's a fantastic example as well. And like I say, I can share a whole host of other examples, right? How we enable our leaders and managers. How do we invest time on developing people, right? Our one-on-ones that take place, how we share information. Everything is open. People have access to information. We have something known as a decision hub where key projects are published, and Red Hatters are welcome to participate and upvote and share their comments. And I think that's such a fantastic opportunity. And if I can give you one concrete example again, is like our strategic path that is set, like that's not done by our leaders behind closed doors. Everything is open. It goes through an iterative process where feedback is gathered. Every employee at Red Hat is able to contribute to that, right? And all of that feeds into how eventual decisions are taken. So those are some examples I can think of.
Yeah, no, I think those are great things. I mean, memo list, I think, has been talked about, outside of Red Hat, and there's a lot that people talk about in terms of that. And it's really, again, that opportunity, whether it's memo list or whether it's Ask Me Anything sessions with Paul Cormier and others, for people to challenge, right? And I think that's you need to do it respectfully, but to people to really challenge either the status quo or maybe the direction or what they're seeing. And I think as a leader, sometimes, it's uncomfortable to be challenged. I often found just personally that if I'm not being challenged by others, then there's either a really small percentage chance that I just got it right off the bat, or I haven't done a good job of bringing people into that conversation. So thanks for sharing that. And I know you're not a Red Hatter, Jen, but anything else you would like to add from that perspective? Okay.
Throw one more question in.
All right. What are the biggest barriers when trying to convince an organization that open is the better way?
Come to my session. Again, we found, so in the last 2 years, done a lot of work with CIOs, heads of state, director levels, variety of people leading teams and building solutions around the world. And we found that 64% of those leaders, the reason that they say we can't do open is literally a lack of education, understanding, lack of context, assumptions, those sort of things. And that barrier is, again, broad statement, but one of the statements that was made by a CIO is, well, we can't do open because we deal with people's data. It's like, well, that's kind of actually not accurate, so let's dig into that. So when you start digging into those conversations to understand, again, current understanding and how we can take a limiting belief around that and expand it out with more awareness, we begin to find that it is just, okay, I didn't understand. I didn't know that could be applied in this context, that open exists far outside of just the technology conversation of how we're, our approaches and practices for building solutions. But it also is then the next big piece of that is the cultural piece. What policies have to change, what governance has to shift, how do we allow people to stop being competitive and become collaborative within our organization? How does that information flow? And so it's a variety of those things that are the biggest barriers. The other thing I would say is other parts of my work that is focused on the value of contribution. We've discovered that people have different acceptances to language, let's say. So sometimes I recommend it's very important to find bridging words for people. And what I mean by that is if you have a leader that is very much feels like resistant to, their whole purpose has been to build a legacy of an organization or deliver a solution, right? And then if you come in with the word like innovation and we're going to change everything and it's going to be fantastic and brand new, that hits a resistance wall for that person because they're like, well, what about everything that I've been doing? What are you going to do with that? And so if you recognize that, you come to your conversations differently to talk about how open isn't just breaking everything apart and making it brand new and wildly innovative. It's about taking the best parts of that, moving other things forward. It's about the evolution. It's about the iteration of what you're doing. So, I can talk about that endlessly, and I'm happy to outside of this session.
Yeah.
Shabnoor, anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, definitely. So, all our studies, both at what we've done at Red Hat, but also outside, we've seen that's pointed out there are 3 barriers to transformation: technology, process, culture, and people. And the interesting thing is that the biggest barrier to transformation is culture and people. Mm-hmm. What I have found in my experience working with different leaders, organizations worldwide, is that we completely often zone out this biggest challenge around culture and people. And there are many reasons for that. First of all is that there is a need by organizations and leaders to get to things fast, give me the solution I want, have a magic wand and get it sorted out, right? And the thing is, transformation in itself by nature is time. It takes time because it includes people and culture. But the also thing is that with technology and processes are easier to fix because there is a non-human element to those, right? Also, what I've learned in my experience is that we don't have a deeper understanding of how and why culture is important. And I always quote this study from Hesketh and Carter, who had conducted, this intense research for about, on 300 plus companies and studying, all the organizations that were investing in creating a positive, generative, open culture. What was the outcome in the long term, right? What were the business outcomes? Like, how was it more profitable or how was it beneficial? And the results showed that these organizations who are consciously building a positive organizational culture hit on innovation, positive innovation, higher customer engagement, profitability, and that percentage was about a 756% as compared to the organizations that were not investing in developing healthy organizational cultures, right? So that's what we run into, is that we haven't fully as organizations understood the role of developing that culture and our role as leaders in driving, because you as leaders have to drive organizational culture, right? You can expect people to behave in a certain way, but if you're not setting that direction and if you're not taking ownership of it, the chances are that the culture could be, taken. It can become weak, or it could be not contributing to your success, and that's how it becomes an inhibitor.
Thank you, Shabnoor. Well, I know there's a lot of interest in this topic because we have way more questions than we have time. We've got 2 minutes left, and I would be remiss if we didn't give each of the panelists an opportunity to spend just a few seconds on maybe suggested next steps or a call to action or key takeaways that you'd like to share with folks.
There's a lot of free resources to get started around open characteristics, the principles of open through the Open Organization. You can go to the website, theopenorganization.org. We've 6 books, I think, that we've co-authored together in that space that are accessible as well. Happy to talk to all of you offline about potential next steps. I'll again recommend my session at 2 o'clock, and we'll talk further about open culture there.
Yeah, absolutely. And those resources as well, if you want to know some very specific organizational and industry examples, I invite you to visit us on redhat.com and explore the work we have done at Red Hat Open Innovation Labs, because we have case studies, we have examples of how we have helped our customers transform, not only in technology, but as well as including culture and open leadership.
Great. Well, Jen, Shabnoor, I'd really like to thank the 2 of you. I'd like to thank our studio audience and, of course, everybody joining with us online. Thanks for joining the Open Organization session, and enjoy the rest of today's summit. Thank you.
Thank you very much.